Okay, well, it's 2 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much. This is the webinar series called Conversations for Caregivers, Creating Real Change. And this is the very first webinar, and I'm so very excited to have Dr. Eboni Green here with us. We're talking about a very important issue around isolation, and especially in these times. But first, I just wanted to introduce myself and why I am so passionate about creating a forum to share resources with fellow caregivers. So my name is Nicole Dauz, and I am the proud mother of 2 wonderful children. I have a 14-year-old typical son and an 11-year-old daughter with a rare genetic disease and an autism diagnosis. So as you can appreciate, my first 5 years of being a caregiver was one where I was in shock, and I was just going through the motions because I was doing weekly therapy so my daughter could learn to walk, could learn to dress herself, and learn to feed herself. And speech would come much, much later down the road. And during that time, I just buried any emotion that was coming up. I was in survival mode, as I'm sure all of you can relate. And after about 5 years, the cumulative stress of the daily challenges of being a family caregiver were just too much. And I started having physical manifestations. I was breaking out in rashes, and I was ending up in the hospital after a panic attack. But every time the doctors would tell me that I was perfectly healthy, and the dermatologists would be surprised because they had no answers for the rash. Also, I knew that my life wasn't changing, that things weren't going to get easier with my daughter. So even though she would hit milestones and she had learned to walk and had learned to, put her socks on and her shirt on, as far as dressing goes, that there were behavior issues and other things that would appear. And I also knew that there were no doctors who specialize in supporting family caregivers. So I knew it was up to me to figure out how to make a change, how to get better. As a primary caregiver for my daughter, I couldn't be breaking down because I need to be strong so I can support my family. So that's when I really started making the changes, seeking out help to figure out how could I make changes given the crazy circumstances of my day, the burdens, the frustration, and all of those things. And that's how I fell in love with self-care. That's how I fell in love with caring for myself. And I want to help other caregivers because caregivers come to me when they're stressed and they're maxed out, and I'm able to support them because I've been where they've been. But I want people to, to get resources, to get tips before they get to that point. Not everyone needs to feel overwhelmed and stressed out and at the end of their rope before they reach for help. And I'm so excited that Dr. Eboni Green is here. So in addition to being a caregiver, she's an amazing woman, mother, wife, and entrepreneur. So she's going to walk us through her perspective on isolation, and specifically from isolation to communion, and how we as caregivers can find a place where we don't feel alone on this journey. So, Dr. Green, please share with us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get right into the presentation.
Well, I am so excited to have this opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm very appreciative of Nicole sharing herself, her experiences, her passion for caring for caregivers with both me, and I hope that you grow to appreciate what she does as well. My husband and I co-founded Caregiver Support Services in the late 90s. My goal was to become a long-term care administrator, and in the course of my work, I'm an RN as well. I did admissions, and I found that many families were not knowing about resources, very, very stressed out during maybe a short-term admission or a long-term stay in a long-term care facility. And so we started what we called the geriatric support group then. And when I finished my graduate work, my husband and I relocated to his hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. And I did a community search, and we started caregiver support services. We provided training and support, and we've now moved a majority of those tools and resources online so that we can serve more people. So I want to talk to you today about isolation from isolation to communion. And I have some great resources and tips that I have found helpful in my own caregiving journey. And so I want to share that with you. But before I do, I want to hone in on something that Nicole said at the beginning of her chat or her introduction. Nicole, would you be able to go ahead and load up those slides for me? And as she's doing that, I'm just going to share that when I first started looking at this topic, I was really thinking about isolation to communion in the sense of, in the context of grief. And so one of the things that I had in my own personal caregiving situation is that my daughter at 16 was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And what they would say later on is that if you were going to have one, this was the one that you would want to have a diagnosis with because of the ability to treat either the symptoms or to actually have the tumor removed. And so I did have a personal experience there with caregiving. And I really do feel like at that time, I was working on my PhD. Our youngest was 2. And my friends, all of their children were older, around my daughter's age. And so this is where I started to feel more isolated from my personal inner circle. And so one of the things I think is very helpful as we talk today is to do a little bit of a self-assessment. So I'm going to have you look at the questions on the bottom of the screen where it says evaluate your social wellness. And when you evaluate, if you agree with the question, you could mark down mentally or otherwise on your paper. If you agree with the statement, 2. If you somewhat agree with the statement, assign a 1. If you disagree with the statement, assign a 0. And so these are the questions. I am able to take time away from caregiving to attend to my spiritual needs. Question 2, despite the fact that I have caregiving responsibilities, I continue to have contact with friends at the same level as I did in the past. 3, there are people at work I can talk to about caregiving. Question 4, don't forget to assign your 2 if you agree, 1 if you somewhat agree, or 0 if you disagree. So question 4, I am satisfied with the number and quality of social supports available from family, friends, church, and my community. And number 5, participate in at least 2 social gatherings or social activities per month. Now, I know that that has changed a little bit in light of COVID, that we have to be extra careful. But just thinking about some of the ways that you can communicate and network with your friends and family, those social activities are important. So that may alter your score just a tad because of the circumstances. So if you would scroll up just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a 7 or higher, then you're socially well. Now that doesn't mean we want you to leave our exciting conversation today. That means that you're doing well, and we want to provide some additional resources that you will have in your toolkit so that you continue to have a high level of communion or social wellness. If you have between a 4 to 6, then you're doing okay. And so we hope some of the things that we share can help you broaden your horizons. And if you have a 0 to 3, then we definitely are glad that you're here so that we can give you some suggestions on improving your social network. Now, Gretchen Rubin says, negative emotions like loneliness, envy, and guilt have an important role to play in a happy life. They're big, flashing signs that something needs to change. And I think this is very important because as we are providing care for our loved ones, there are definitely going to be times where you feel like you're doing well, and there are going to be times where you feel like you're not doing well when it comes to your social well-being. And this is normal for caregiving, to have times where you feel very connected and you have the support that you need. And then there are times where you're going to maybe feel very, very stressed or distressed. And that's often when caregivers reach out, is when we don't necessarily reach out when we are feeling stressed. I always say there's a difference between stress and distress. And with stress, usually if you get a few minutes of a break, a getaway, a moment to count to 10, to have that pep talk in the mirror, you can recalibrate and you can identify things that have worked in the past. When you're in distress, you don't even know where to begin to make changes. And so hopefully we're encouraging you to recalibrate and look at your isolation and social well-being before you reach a point of being distressed. So when we think about isolation and communion on a continuum, we look at isolation being an unhealthy emotion. It tells us that we definitely need to reach out. We look at loneliness also as an unhealthy, it can be an unhealthy situation, and it depends on what type of loneliness you're experiencing. And then solitude, I think everyone needs some level or measure of solitude, even if it's something very different from what other people do to get or experience solitude. It's usually very specific to your own needs. And then communion is very healthy. And I want to all of us to get to that point where we're experiencing some level, some measure of communion. So with isolation, and earlier Nicole was talking about what I would characterize as some level of grief. When my daughter started to have seizures, there was the fear that she would injure herself, but there was also, she was driving, she was working a part-time job. There was grief associated with the loss of how things were. And I think I started to become more isolated because family and friends could not relate to that. And sometimes our close family and friends are not able to support us in a way that we really need the support, because they're either afraid to ask or say the wrong thing, or they're simply just busy with their own lives and not recognizing all of the things that you're going through. And so this is where I really started to feel isolated, because my group of friends and I would do a lot of traveling and hanging out. We would get the kids together, and now I had a 2-year-old. I was working on my dissertation, and my daughter was in and out of the hospital for a full year. And so isolation is usually a gradual change in relationships where there's a loss of contact with once close family and friends, until you find that you're having little or no contact with individuals who are a part of your inner circle. This is what happened to me during my caregiving experience with my daughter. The loss of connection may result in feelings of disconnection and depression. And I was very depressed. I didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, I gained 20 pounds, which was, all I could do was enjoy food. We were in and out of the hospital. I was so distressed. The doctors were not necessarily listening, and I did not have that time with my friends.
I
This
just,
is how,
I was
oh,
just
go
going
ahead.
to add that, you know, hindsight's 2020, looking back, because Summer didn't receive her diagnosis until she was 6, for me, I felt that we didn't belong anywhere because there was no box for us.
Mm-hmm.
So even from a research perspective, because I was still working full time and taking care of Summer, I was online. I didn't necessarily want online community because I was so overwhelmed with just being on the computer after coming home from work. And there was no, I found it was hard for me. I just didn't want to reach out to special needs parents. There was like, yeah, it was like when she received her autism diagnosis, all of my friends were like, oh, here, join our group. And I remember feeling like, oh, wow, there's an entire community out there ready to support and welcome, you know, parents of kids with autism. But if you don't have that diagnosis, then you're not welcome, even though all of the, you know, flags are there, etc. And so I think that's a really important point as well of, you know, feeling isolated, and because we didn't even know what Summer had, it even was more challenging for families and friends to support us because the, unfortunately my parents were like, oh, she'll just outgrow it. Like, you know what I mean? She's just going to wake up one day and she'll start talking. And so I think then you just start sharing because you just, yeah, there's not that relatability. So thank you for that.
I absolutely agree. And that's exactly what we went through. So I think that if we talk about how isolation impacts your well-being,
Yeah.
lack of support from your family and friends can definitely impact your wellness, your health and wellness. I found this very interesting that researchers suggest that maintaining poor social networks, could have the same psychological and biomedical risk factors as cigarette smoking. I mean,
Wow.
it's a big thing. And then poor social support among caregivers is also associated with increased mortality,
Yeah.
depression, physical health problems, and other health related issues. So, like you said, until you get either the diagnosis or you have an opportunity to reflect,
Yeah.
you may not even be knowing that you're experiencing the isolation, and that um, when you do come to that realization, I think it could be even more. Um, I think you can find coping mechanisms, but I sometimes think of it as like a post-traumatic stress response. Like I'll never get over um, having gone through that really challenging experience with my daughter,
Yeah.
and having people not listen, having a lot of very supportive friends and family, but my close network of friends kind of dissembling and them still doing all the fun things. And I'm seeing them having trips and things like that. And I'm not in the picture because I'm caring for my daughter. And so I think it can be um, so challenging. Now, I didn't think about these things when I was going through the situation, these ways that you can combat social isolation, like joining an online caregiver support group. Like you said, though, Nicole, if you don't have a diagnosis, if you don't have a category that you feel like you fit in, if you don't feel safe,
Yeah.
then you're probably not going to join a group. And so you may end up being distressed before you are able to finally reach out for the support. I wish I would have been more comfortable with setting up Zoom chats.
Mm.
Um, I found that I wasn't even calling, we weren't even talking because I just didn't feel like they could relate to um, what I was going through. And right now, one of the things with COVID is creating these caregiver pod groups.
Mhm.
It's a new idea, so I don't know how well it will work, but if you have loved one that you're caring for, whether it's you're talking about your child or your parent, that you may have maybe one or two other families, and those families continue to do the social distancing and only going out for very specific things. But the pod group could then be the folks that get together for play dates and things like that, and it's only one or two other families, and that way you're still getting that connection
Mhm.
and support. So it's a newer thing that I've been reading about. I want to say that it's a Harvard study that is associated with it. But it's a newer idea to think about if you know that you're going to have a group that's protective of their child or their parent, and then you're not getting out there, but you're still getting that social wellness and connection.
Mhm. Oh, those are great tips.
Okay, and then sometimes we feel lonely. So I'm going to just say that when I think about loneliness, one of my go-to movies, I've had a lot of loss in the last few years. My mother-in-law, who was very instrumental in helping, she was an LPN. And so when my daughter Asia had the brain tumor and we needed to keep her home, I had my mother-in-law who would come over and sit with her so that Terrence and I could, my husband and I could go to work at our business. And, that stressful time when you're going to cry and you just need somebody who understands, she was always there. And we ended up caring for her a few years ago. And now it's been 2 years now that she's passed. And as a part of my grieving, I did write a book, but I also did a lot of watching the movie Meet Joe Black. And there's a woman in the movie. I just love the scenes between Brad Pitt, and she's a Jamaican woman and she's nearing the end of life. And the thing that I always get out of that scene is that she's talking about she's ready to go. She's in a lot of pain, and Joe Black says that he's lonely, and the Jamaican woman says people are mostly lonely. And that always sticks with me because a lot of times you feel like you're all alone and you're the only one that is feeling this way.
Yeah.
And I always think to myself, now if I'm feeling that way, then other people that are in my circle are probably feeling the same way. And that prompts me to at least reach out in some way if I think about that person, to if I start thinking about them, to actually take action and reach out. And so loneliness relates to how you feel when your social network becomes smaller than desired. In our situation, it's become smaller than desired because we've lost so many very close family members in the last 5 years. And so the loneliness for us is more related to a grieving process. But remember, I said people are mostly lonely. So the reason doesn't necessarily matter so much as knowing that other people are probably feeling the same way. So in some instances, the size of your social network is impacted by geographical separation, as you're simply too far. And now, a lot of us can't travel to get close to folks. So, it's using some of these strategies. Sometimes the loneliness, though, is that we are avoiding things. And I find that sometimes we're avoiding people and places. And that may be because you've had some type of traumatic experience there, a certain hospital room. Maybe there's a place that you go. I used to go back to Iowa, Sioux City, where my husband and I met. We both went back there a lot. But after we started losing so many family and friends from there, I don't go back as much, even though my best cousin sister is there. And I had to sit back and think, why do I avoid going there? And it was because of the grief. So sometimes you're increasing your loneliness because you have something that you're attributing to that place or that thing, and that may make you avoid that situation, and then you feel lonely. What do you do to nurture your connections? So once I felt like I was not able to relate, then that lessened my willingness, I guess, or my eagerness to pick up the phone. So maybe more often than not, what I would end up doing is is talking on Facebook, which you can do so only do so much of that. And so have had to reflect and say, well, I'm not as close because my close friends are all in the same state now, and they pick up the phone and call each other. And I'm not doing that. So I'm taking some ownership of that myself. And then what keeps your bonds of friendship strong? Well, our kids. We all have kids that are the same age, and our memories. Everybody was in my wedding. I was in their weddings. My best friend, who passed away last year, her son, you know, was the oldest out of the group. And so, things that are memories that keep you connected. And I'll just share this last part about the Joe Black movie. And the Jamaican woman does say, that you take pretty pictures, that your memories are your pictures. And so sometimes in my loneliness, I have moments of happiness or periods of happiness because I'm able to reflect on the pretty pictures, on all the fun things that we did, and have a good laugh about some of those things. Something you could do to decrease your loneliness is to make a list of 3 places. Maybe you're not going to be able to do it now during COVID, but when we're able to actually go and do something, I decided a month or so ago, talked to my dad. We're all going to try to go to Florida for Christmas in 2021, not this year, but to just plan that and be all together. So that gives you a feeling of something that you're planning for, a reason to connect and call each other, and also time to be happy about that future memory that you're going to make.
That's so funny because my family's doing that as well. My 2 brothers and I, and well, obviously my parents, but they reached out and they're like, "Hey, what do you think about going to Costa Rica for Christmas?" And originally it was supposed to be this year because we didn't think COVID would last that long, with the kids, so we can all be together. And I was like, I love that idea. And so every time I talk to my mom now, she's like, Costa Rica Christmas. And so now I'm probably we have to wait till 2021. But as you said, it's true. It's that excitement about all of us together, all of the cousins, just sharing, especially Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice that you're kind of looking forward to the same thing as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah. And I just wanted to add my own personal experience of one of the things in my caregiver journey where I realized loneliness crept in was me proactively setting boundaries with people and being very aware of the relationships in my life and who, I'm at a place where I want a relationship. After I spend time with somebody, I want to feel better. I don't want to feel depleted. So that was actually quite a lonely and I don't know, sad kind of activity to do when you realize that they weren't necessarily give and take relationships. And then when you just kind of very quietly back away, and then though you're kind of left feeling a bit lonely. Now the good part is during COVID, I've really strengthened and deepened the relationship with those closest to me. And so being an extrovert, I used to have like lots of friends, and I find it interesting. I'm now at the other spectrum where I have a small group of really, really close friends. And like for the first time in my life, it feels really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't miss all those people that I thought I wanted to spend time with. And so that's been a revelation, but that process in itself was very lonely for me.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes you have to have help to even do that. Meaning,
Yeah.
it's not. I've been seeing a counselor therapist for 3 years now,
Hmm.
and making those changes and recognizing what was causing my distress
Yeah.
was a process. And so looking at the relationships that are meaningful, that aren't a ton of work for you,
Yeah.
that has become a realization over time. And it's very hard. And sometimes this won't be true for everyone, but for me, the most challenging relationship that I have in my life is my mom.
Oh,
And so that has been to have to let that be where it is, and then to figure out how to rework it um, so that I'm not having a panic attack every, so often because we're not connecting. Um, has been really challenging. So I want people to know that it's not uncommon that people who are really close, including your mom, and I've even told her, I don't care how old a person is, you are never feel whole without a good relationship with your mom.
yeah.
And she's just not at a place where she can do that. And so I have to accept that. And it's taken a lot of work to do that. And that feels lonely. That feels lonely.
Yeah.
Can you scroll up a
Oh,
little bit?
yes.
So I love this next quote. In solitude, the brain gains strength and learns to lean upon itself.
Mm.
So I really am a person. I'm extrovert when it comes to caregiving and hanging out. But if it is in my day-to-day life, I'm a person who thrives with solitude. And I have a pond, a small pond in my yard with my fish. And it took me a long time. I actually dug the pond myself. My husband thought it was hilarious because I'm a girly girl. So he thought, oh, she'll never do it. And it's one of the more beautiful features in our yard. And we both love it. And my thing was for years, I'm going to get a bench. And finally, I found this fabulous red bench and red door, and I have a red bench and my pond there. And that's where I um, get a lot of solitude, come up with a lot of ideas and thoughts. And my bathroom. I nagged and nagged and nagged because we've been in our house for many years. And this summer, just a month or two ago, I finally got the whole new bathroom. So it's like a spa retreat. And I'm skipping on the inside because the other part of my solitude is warm baths.
Yeah.
So, and I have every bath, the tea bags, the bath bombs, the oil, the
Yeah.
whatever is new coming out with Dr. Teal's, I have all of those things. So solitude can be viewed as a form of self-preservation. And I find that in my relationships in life, I do a lot of giving, giving, giving. And so I need that solitude to recharge. And sometimes when I'm overwhelmed, I have to remind myself that, okay, what have you really done for yourself? And I've been putting that into practice. And then after my mother-in-law passed, and we also lost my father-in-law within that time, I went back to in this past the couple of years of just gaining so much weight and being not taking really good care of myself. And so like I just started the beginning of the year with drinking plenty of water and no pop. And then I started my Pilates again. And I find that just doing those types of things that are make me feel good about myself, but also that I'm pouring something back in so that my cup doesn't get empty. Because you can't serve from an empty cup. So things that will help you with your coping and help you with with dealing with emotionally overwhelming situations, and things that help you connect with your inner core. And so there are a few things here that um, may help you with practicing solitude, and that could be things like journaling, praying, sitting quietly, boy, that is a really good thing to just sit in your thoughts for a few minutes. Taking a nap, one of my top things. Um, Being able to take a hot bath or a shower. Having a hot cup of tea. Tea can be really great for your digestion and other things, but it's soothing also. Meditation, and there are lots of really good meditation videos or apps that you could use. On our site, we have a people tell me I have a very soothing voice, and so I have a couple of meditation videos there, a minute or two long, just so you can kind of unwind. And then journaling. I know that Nicole journals. I do too, and sometimes they turn into books. I like to write poems. And so you just write, and you never know what that material is going to become. And you don't have to have those expectations, but it could maybe help someone down the road.
Mm-hmm. No, I was just going to share, in addition to that, yeah, it's been a big year on lots of, on the personal front. And so I've started, I was realizing that I needed more solitude, especially during COVID. I was feeling very resentful that I was home full time with my daughter. That's never a good feeling because I do love her. And so I decided, okay, I need to wake up earlier in the morning. And so I've been getting up at 5:30. So that's about an hour and a half before she does. And that hour and a half has just saved me. Because I do 30 minutes of yoga, and then I do meditation, and then I do journaling and reading. And I didn't realize how important solitude was in my overall well-being. And so I agree with this entire image, because I'm like, yeah, all of that, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at different times in life, different things bring you that solitude
True.
and joy, and you get joy
Yes.
from that. So that is great that you are are getting up that extra hour and a half, and you're doing a lot of self-care, and you're getting the chance to read. I mean, that's like dream.
Well,
Uh,
that's the thing. It was like at the end of the night, I would like last one page. I would just be so tired. And then I said, well, the thing is yeah, stop complaining and just try to do something. So flipping it in the morning. And since then, actually reading books about caregiving has been really interesting and insightful as well, to make me feel less alone, right? Less isolated. And yeah, so it's been very interesting revelation how much solitude I actually need.
yeah, that's good. But it's great, 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 great. So we all want to get to this point of communion. And this is basically what Nicole and I are talking about with her Costa Rica trip and our trip to Florida, is that you're sharing a spiritual connection. And so I'm not talking about necessarily, your church connection. I do always think about one of the things that stands out to me about from a religious experience is that you're in a building where other people are hopefully um, thinking on the same positive thing that you're thinking about. And so I always think about it in that way, that your spiritual connection with communion does not have to happen in a building or place, but it's the feeling that you have when you are around someone that or people that you don't have to necessarily tell them everything that you need or want, that there's a understanding there. And that can be hard to attain, but it is really a wonderful spiritual experience from that perspective. So you're not just being around people, but sharing. One of the things I have tried to do is not have my phone out when we have family gatherings, to not always take pictures. When we do have big events, I will just go ahead and have a photographer. That way we're just getting pictures while people are sitting in rooms and while they're having conversations, so I can be present. Because if I'm the one taking pictures and going around, then I can't be present. I'm not really communing. And I would find that when the family would get together, especially after my mother-in-law passing, that I would do all the prep stuff, like cook and make sure the house is in order and do all these things. And then when everybody would get here, I would go basically in my room or back here in the office, and kind of there'd be one or two people that would kind of maybe come and check on me, but I'd be back by myself. And I started to identify that, hey, my problem is when we all get together, there are people missing. And so those people not being there makes me sad. But I have to now appreciate and build new memories, those good pictures, like the Jamaican woman says, so that I can commune with my family. And so one of the practices I did was, I still do a lot of prep and all of that, but when it comes time for the family to be here, I make sure that I do have the photographer, that I get out there and I'm around people, because that's the whole crux of it, is to develop those relationships and to be present. So remember that if you're feeling lonely or isolated, that others in your circle probably are feeling the same, and especially now with COVID. Also remember that the activities in which you participate are not only a part of who you are, but they will also help you with coping. So being able to be in the family experiences has really helped me. I recognize that I'm a person that needs solitude, but I also need to feel connected with my family. And then communion is all about guiding another through challenging feelings that accompany caregiving. So sometimes my family gets over here, we get on a memory about mom, and we're all crying, and it's okay. And sometimes you don't necessarily know that everybody else is feeling that way. And I know that my son has said, you and dad, I don't know how you do it, and you're so strong. And I'm like, me and dad cry together all the time. We're always crying. So, the kids don't necessarily know that you're going through those things. And so they think you're just this pillar of strength. And it's not always about being strong or not showing them that this is like very challenging situation.
I just wanted to add quickly, one of the common themes that I'm hearing you say, and I just really want to highlight it for caregivers, is that it's the self-awareness part. And I think that is so key. And, now that I'm allowing myself more solitude time, that's when reflection takes place. So, Dr. Green's presentation includes these great tips where you're asking yourself questions. And I think that's a muscle that we just need to build and get it to become stronger, because the more self-aware we become, just our entire caregiver journey, I believe, changes. Because then if we're able to identify, after I hang out with this person, I don't feel as good. And then, as you said, you get together with family and you're like, what's going on here? And those are the very small things that are going on behind the scenes that play such a big role, I think, in allowing us to shift from, one emotion to a next, or a feeling to the next.
Yeah. And I think that number one, it changes over time.
Yeah, true.
So, and then the other thing is that if you don't have that opportunity for solitude, you don't have an opportunity for reflection.
Yeah, correct.
So the idea is to actually reach out as early as possible when you feel like you need assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when you're stressed and you think, if I just do this, this, and that, I can make it through.
Yeah.
Rather than just making it through, reach out for the help when you are stressed. Don't wait until you're distressed, because then it's going to take so much more for you to have an opportunity to reflect, because at that point you're usually completely falling apart in the distress. And so you can't really see and reflect. And then having those services and supports is that can come in and assist. Getting a counselor or a therapist if you need it, to have the time to reflect and really get an opportunity to know where your pain points are, and getting services, accessing services, whether it be through, like respite services. People will sometimes suggest that, and folks won't necessarily feel comfortable. But now a lot of organizations that will provide funding for that realize that you may not want to have a stranger, but maybe it's your sister or your cousin that you could pay, and you could go into another area of the house and take your nap,
Mm-hmm.
or take your bath. So
Okay.
the big thing is that you are a piece of the puzzle of someone else's life. You may never know where you fit, but others will. And the holes in their life, others will fill holes in their life with pieces of you. So you may never know where you fit, but others will, and the holes in their life will be filled with pieces of you. I think that is such a good reflection to have at the end of this conversation, that we don't always know where or why we are faced with such challenges. Um, you don't know why you have to lose folks. You don't know why you don't, you're in a situation where you're caring for your child, and you're so unsure of things. And what are you being drawn at the end of the day to learn about yourself or others? And if Nicole didn't have Summer, Nicole and I wouldn't have connected. I feel blessed by the connection. And she wouldn't be able to share such a personal experience of caring for Summer, and making her life meaningful, and through that experience making the rest of our lives meaningful.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's true. I've shared recently that, if it weren't for being Summer's mother, I wouldn't, I believe, have the strength to step forward so much and, advocate for myself. It was only learning to advocate for Summer that I found my own voice. And yeah, it's been quite a journey, as I said, now that I realize that, when you're a mom, of course, you're responsible for other human beings, but as a caregiver, that level of responsibility, Jordan, when he's 18, 19, and he's a young man, he can go off to university or travel the world or do whatever. And I'll always be his mom, but Summer will always need constant supervision. And so I think it's leveraging that and using, as I call it, my caregiver cape to say, I am going to put myself first. I am actually going to make decisions in my life that other people may not understand, but I need to be happy. I need to be really solid and grounded so that I can be the best caregiver for Summer for decades and decades and decades to come. And if I weren't her caregiver, I probably wouldn't have made some of those decisions. So it is very interesting, the gifts that we learn. And I mean, that's whole part of the idea around the webinar series and the conversation for caregivers. The vision in the mission is to change the story around caregiving. I mean, look at us, we're two amazing caregivers. We, our lives were filled with gratitude and solitude and communion and all of these wonderful things. And it's really showcasing all of the good things and all of the skill sets and all of the strengths that we gain through our caregiver journey, and that we should be really celebrating those. So
Absolutely.
I don't know if anyone has any question and answer, or sorry, we have the answers, but the questions, well, hopefully that for us. One person did email me one, she had registered for the webinar, and then there was a conflict. But the question is around introverts. And what happens when you're an introvert and you feel alone? So, I mean, imagine, in the regular scheme of things, you're an introvert and you experience loneliness. And then you enter the caregiver, I'll say, realm. And then you're experiencing, isolation and loneliness as an introvert. What would be some tips, Dr. Green, that you would have?
Well, I would consider myself an introvert.
Yeah.
And so, what we're really getting at is that I'm most revitalized when I get that opportunity to do some things for myself. So maybe it's not necessarily developing new connections, but when the caregiver is feeling isolated, reaching out to those people that you do feel safe and comfortable with. And maybe it's just a one-on-one. Some people are going to feel better having a supportive relationship one-on-one. And I really do suggest, when possible, to not necessarily talk about your caregiving scenario while you're spending time, because is that really a break if you're spending the entire time talking about, everybody's going to talk about your children and how's mom and that type of thing, but not really getting deep into the caregiving situation when you're trying to get revitalized. So reserve that one-on-one time when you're feeling isolated with another, one-on-one time with another person, and don't talk about your caregiving. Talk about things that really are of benefit to you, that revitalize you. And then do those things that we talked about on the slides with bathing or hot tea or yoga. Those can be very helpful things to give you solitude, to open your mind so that you're able to bring in those new ideas that are going to help you.
Mm-hmm. I think the example used is key, because I have two close friends and they both wanted kids, and for whatever reason they didn't have them, or they couldn't have them. And I'm very mindful of that. So when we spend time together, at the beginning, it was so refreshing for me because we didn't talk about kids because they didn't want to hear about it. And it really gave me almost a place to escape. I mean, of course they'll ask, and then they love Jordan, they love Summer, but when we get together, it's usually active. So we'll go hiking or canoeing or camping. So we can even spend an entire weekend together, and there's no mention of kids,
Mm-hmm.
And
that's very healthy.
It's
That's very
so
healthy.
healthy. And, because at the beginning, but it's interesting because sometimes I'll be like I was just away for a weekend with some friends, and my one friend was like, she has twins, so she's a mom, but she's like, I've tried so hard, Nicole, to try to relate and understand what it must be like for you. And she says, I can't. And she's like, I feel like I'm failing you as a friend. And I said, no, I said, it's, I don't hold that against you, because until I was a caregiver, I didn't know, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like. And it's no one's fault. And so I find it interesting that none of my close friends are caregivers, because then sometimes I feel so lonely.
Yeah.
Because no one can really relate. But then I'm like, but does that matter? How do these people make you feel? Are there any other outlets where you can share your caregiving experience? So it's almost like ebbs and flow. I think I crave the non-caregivers more, because we just talk about other things.
And that's so needed. And even when I talk about Asia and her diagnosis with the brain tumor and such, and
yeah,
that happened. She gets checkups.
okay.
She's cancer free, and so once we have the tumor removed. So sometimes even when she was sick, my friends felt guilty, and so they didn't want to be around and
Yeah.
so I felt isolated because of that. You know, everybody's out doing other things. And then I sometimes will feel guilty because with Asia, she's, you know, um, fully you know, she's fine.
Yeah.
She's in her 20s now. And so it's like, you know, that's not really comparable to having a long-term caregiving situation.
Mhm.
But what I do, and even when you're talking about caring for your parents,
Yeah.
that's not comparable to the experience that someone caring for a child will have. And so, but there are things that we can connect on, and so we work to connect on those things and try not to feel guilty about, you know, supporting someone. It's just wonderful that instead of your friends disengaging, that they're having a level of honesty to say, I don't know, but I love you and I'm your friend and let's go have fun. And
Yes.
that's wonderful.
True. No, very, very blessed on that front. It's just, it was, yeah, it's very just top of mind for me. So I don't know if there's any other questions. We're almost at the hour. I just wanted to, sorry, I have a guest. Sorry, 2 more minutes. Oh my goodness. Sorry. My son was just checking on whether he still had to watch his little sister or not. So
Caregiving in action.
caregiving in action. Mom, how much longer? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. But anyways, oh goodness me. So yes, thank you so much, Dr. Green. That was very insightful. And I'm going to go back. So through the deck, everybody who signed up for the webinar will receive a copy of the deck. This will also be, we're going to, for replay, we're going to be posting this so people after the fact will be able to, more people will be able to get value from your presentation. And I just again wanted to thank you. It's just so funny. Just reach out and say, hey, you want to do this? And you're like, sure. And it's just been an absolute joy getting to know you and just learning more and more about all of the amazing experience you have in the different roles as a caregiver. And I think we had spoken about that last week, that more and more there are people who have more than one caregiver experience. And that's another thing too. You know, it's not just a parent or of a child. It could be, and then they're caring for an aging child, an aging parent,
Mm-hmm.
or you have adults who have, you know, multiple parents or in-laws, etc. And so, you know, I think the more resources, the more stories we can share about the journey, I think there's just going to be more and more, you know, unpaid family caregivers, especially across North America. I'm in Canada and Dr. Green is in the States. And so I always say North America. And, you know, right now, I think the stats up to like, you know, 76 million unpaid family caregivers. So resources like this are super important. And that's the irony. You know, I did some research for countries and like that's larger than the population of Spain. And yet people feel isolated and alone. And so it's really just unpacking this really important, I think, topic around how can we move from isolation and loneliness and get to communion where we can all, you know, support each other in any way possible. So thank you again. When we send out the replay, we'll be hooking up to your website and your books. Yes, she's an author. She's written some amazing books that we can learn from. And I'm looking forward to diving into those as well and doing some, well, I say reviews, but just sharing my takeaways with people as well. So thank you again. And we'll see you on the next webinar. Bye.
All right. Thank you.